Welcome to the A&M Global Webcast series addressing business concerns we face today. Today's conversation is between Alvarez and Marsal leaders in corporate performance improvement and private equity performance improvement. We'll be talking about what businesses can do right now, using the time in our current lockdown to best prepare for the recovery into a new normal market and world.
My name is Markus Lahrkamp. I'm a Managing Director in our Private Equity Performance Improvement Group at Alvarez & Marsal. I've been consulting and working with private equity funds for over 20 years and have been with Alvarez & Marsal for the last 11 years, leading our Performance Improvement Group that consists mostly of operators and consultants that help companies with difficult times, but also private equity funds, with assessing opportunities and diligence, in their life cycle.
And this is Ron Orsini. I'm a managing director with Alvarez & Marsal in our corporate performance improvement practice out of our Houston office. I lead our corporate transformation services practice, where we help boards and CEOs of public companies deal with major changes in their cost structure organization brought on by disruption and competition, and activists. Help them to quickly adjust to the new situation, which applies and is very relevant to what we're talking about today.
So let's start with private equity and private equity investors and their portfolio companies. What can they do now, during the lockdown period to prepare for the recovery? And what are the critical actions that should be taken? First of all, let's be very clear. No one knows what the recovery will look like. The pace of the recovery will very much depend on the specific industry and also the geography. So scenario planning is an absolute must, because the length, the intensity will very much vary, by industry, geography, but also specific companies. One thing that we are advising our clients is absolutely start with the no regret moves. You have to look at cost takeout almost immediately when your revenues are challenged. You also have to look at the sales and operations planning process. A lot of our clients are in the cadence of having weekly or monthly sales and operations meetings. We call it S&OP forecast. During this time, you almost have to do this on a daily basis to anticipate demand and supply disruptions and also see trends, very, very early on. Also revisit the cost and organizational structures. This is the time to really think very, very hard about, what needs to get done. As revenues get under pressure, you have to bend the fixed cost curve. That is very, very important, particularly when the recovery hits and, the profitability and the cash generation is going to be key to not only survival, but also to winning. And last but not least, the financial models need to guide the way during every phase. It's very, very important that during every phase of this crisis, whether it's in the lockdown, during the startup, and in the recovery, that you have a good view of your liquidity, your cash, but also the operations. Are we supporting our customers on time? Are our suppliers up to snuff? Are they delivering the products, up to time? So it's very, very important that during this entire process, going through this crisis, that the financial models are in place. Ron?
Marcus, I definitely agree with those points, and that the pace of recovery will be different for every company, and really even different for divisions within companies. And what's also emerging for the new steady state operations, or the new normal we talk about, will likely be very different than even before the crisis. So as we'll be discussing today, the keys will be to stay close to customers, control costs, and really continue to manage cash carefully. And analytics will be even more critical than before. The financial modeling referenced in the scenario planning is is really important for large companies. This really has to be broken down into their individual business unit parts with real-time data from the market, really driving decisions as we go into uncharted territories. So as we think about the operational actions that are needed to be implemented now, again, to think about the new business model. Business model is, again, how the company is organized and how they face the market. But and especially initially, there will be planning will have to be to reduce occupancy in stores, given physical distancing measures will likely stay in place. No large gatherings. Just the new behaviors that will be required, at least in the short term. Big companies have multiple products and service lines and markets and channels. There'll be a lot more sales and collaboration occurring online with customers and vendors. But each business and each business unit will need a different strategy and timing. As we talked about, reference here, digital customer experience is going to change. But it's also a good time to look at the broader transformation needs of the portfolio, recalibrating the organization for what's needed going forward. But what is critical too is to make sure you bring back your employees in a safe and responsible way. Certainly, you'll have to ramp up staff levels in a measured way. To be more of an agile, distributed workforce. And until the virus or a cure is developed and distributed, the new work environment will include a greater focus on health and hygiene, social distancing in the workplace. Working from home will continue, even masks, temperature checks, everything that's needed so employees will feel comfortable and can be fully productive once they're back working again. Regarding investments, I think obviously the focus needs to be on probably expenses and prioritizing expenses to support working capital of inventory and payroll, to support sales going forward, even select advertising, new advertising in the new world. But also to think about investments needed for the digital transformation to support remote work, e-commerce, and all the things that we're now experiencing during the pandemic that will continue afterwards. The operational footprint, again, regarding the transformation, this is a key part of the business model. And think about how customers will be buying, vendors will be selling, and it may require a smaller physical footprint than what has been in place before all this. And the last point on this part is to really act quickly and decisively. It will be expected for every public company that they announce their plans for their recovery on their next quarterly earnings call. So developing a plan, putting it into action will be critical for the market and really what the market is looking for. Anything else that you see, Markus?
Well, I mean, I would like to also, expand on that, Ron, particularly for the leadership, of in private equity for the portfolio companies. It is very, very important also not only to act quickly and decisively, but you also have to have a clear point of view in terms of your communication. It needs to be on point. It needs to be fact-based. It needs to be informed, by what you see from a customer perspective, from a supplier perspective, and you have to have a point of view of, what scenario do you think will apply in your particular case. Again, there may be scenarios, where your revenues are dropping by 40, 50, sometimes even 70%. There are other scenarios, where your revenues are only dropping by about 10%. Each of these, has a different recovery scenario. For private equity, it's very, very important, to focus and prioritize liquidity. As everybody knows, private equity is a leveraged environment. There's debt on the company, so cash is king during every phase of this crisis. During the lockdown, which we are in right now, it's very, very important to take a look at, what liquidity do we have? What does my 13 weeks cash flow tell me to survive? During the recovery, you also have to take a very, very close look at cash and liquidity to not run out of cash and liquidity. During other downturns in the past, what we have seen is that people mastered, the immediate downturn, but during the recovery, they ran out of cash. This is particularly important as we don't know yet whether new money is available, whether it comes, from private equity itself or from lending sources. Right now, it looks like markets are pretty frothy, and you have to assume that you have to finance a lot of the investments that you want to make, or even the working capital on your own. The working capital build, will be a tremendous. You almost have to think, particularly for companies that are taking a big hit on the top line, the restart will be extremely costly, from a liquidity perspective. It is almost like a restart of an entire business. That working capital needs to be very, very closely monitored and managed. So from our perspective, we think you have to put the business on a management tracking tool. 13 weeks cash flow, the S&OP process need to be linked to each other, so to be able to react very, very quickly once markets are picking up. Do we have the cash? Do we have the liquidity to finance the working capital? So again, key messages here. During every phase of this crisis, make sure that you have plenty of cash, plenty of liquidity, and don't get into situations that you cannot control at that point. Ron, anything else?
Yeah, Marcus, I definitely agree. When we come in and do transformations, we're often asked to really clean sheet of business. If you were to start from scratch to design the cost and organization structure for your business, what would it look like? I think that exercise is even more relevant now than ever before. And part of that is, what are your necessary costs and what cash is needed to run that business? In order to instill confidence in vendors and customers for public companies, especially that publish their financials, having that solid balance sheet is more critical than ever. So an eye on cash and managing costs and investments responsibly will be key. And that's just one of the many key success factors for company leaders going forward. So just to wrap up this, Marcus and I wanted just to share a little bit of things that successful executives will be thinking about during these crazy times. It's said our true character is exposed in crises. So what leaders say and do matters, and will serve as a differentiator when the crisis is over. One aspect, communication with all stakeholders. This includes customers, employees, creditors, channel partners, suppliers, and be candid and open with your plans, show your commitment to them, and treat them as partners, and listen. They're also dealing with this. Secondly, set an example from the top. Really show that this is a shared sacrifice. There's a new way of thinking. Show that the change does affect everyone, but also be inspiring and show leadership through the change. The next big important thing, tackle the hard things early. Companies are already announcing big changes in their businesses. Airlines are cutting fleets. Retailers are cutting storefronts even more than before. Changes to business portfolios are happening. So big changes are expected. But these big changes will take time to complete, so important to announce them now. Make cash the single focus, and that's pretty clear in this podcast. Until the business stabilizes, cash will continue to be the focus, given how critical it is for future viability. And don't be afraid to make bold moves. I think there's even less resistance than ever, organizational and market resistance to change than ever. So now's the time to be bold and to have a future plan in place and just go after it. And then lastly, make sure the change is sustainable. Aligning the business to what and how customers will want to buy from you in the future, which is changing, but that alignment is key.
Yep, and from a private equity perspective, Ron, the only thing that I would like to add is the communication has to be on different fronts. It's very, very important not only to talk to your private equity shareholder, the owner of the business, but you also have to talk to lenders, and you may have to talk to local authorities, maybe even state governments, particularly during this crisis, to see whether there's help available, but also to see, what other constituencies are doing so that you're always on top of things and don't get caught, being reactive. You got to be proactive, during this crisis. We have seen in other crises, after other financial crises, on 9/11, that the ones that are following these rules that Ron just outlined, that they will come out ahead and will ultimately the winners, in their particular markets. So I want to close by telling you a little bit of a story of a company and a leader that I think, will be ahead of the crisis, when this is all over and done. So this CEO is running a $200 million consumer products company. He was shut down about 3 weeks ago by the local government, and but instead of just going back home, he is actually standing in his warehouse every morning. He is allowed a skeleton crew. He and his folks are packing trucks to keep operations moving, to service priority accounts that he made sure that they're getting product, while his CFO is monitoring and looking at the cash. He has a very, very detailed 13 weeks, actually 26 weeks, cash flow, and making sure that they are not running out of cash. I think that is the kind of leadership, that is the kind of inspiration that we need. I mean, his words every morning to me are, when I talk to him, you know what, we're going to go through this, and we're going to be ahead of the curve, Marcus, and we're not going to get caught. We're just going to do, what is right for the business, and we're going to do it one day at a time, but also with the clear perspective that we will, ultimately come out of this okay and probably be winning in the marketplace. Ron?
Yep, thank you, Marcus. It's great, and thank you all for listening as we share some of our experiences helping clients address crises of all kinds. Hopefully you'll find this useful as you think about your own pace now back to a successful recovery. We help our clients with the analytics and the action-oriented activities to make this happen. You have our contact information in this podcast. Feel free to reach out to us if we can be of help in any way. And best of luck as you deal with these unprecedented times. But it's times like this that can really make a differentiator going forward.
Alvarez and Marsal. Leadership, action, results.